Hello everybody, welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the second weekend of Thor Love and Thunder. We also saw the opening weekend for Where the Crawdads Sing, and also for Paws of Fury, The Legend of Hank. I'm sure everyone's very excited to hear about those numbers, but the big story, of course, is that Thor Love and Thunder is seeing a massive drop in week 2 because of really bad word of mouth, and it just once again goes ahead and shows you that when you make stupid decisions and when you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. And in this case, it ends up being one of the worst second week drop-offs for any MCU film in history, putting it up there with the films like Black Widow and also Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But there are a lot of different things about those films in comparison to this one, which don't put this one in nearly as great or as strong as a category as the previous films mentioned. But before we get further into this bit of news, please make sure you smash that like button, loud that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So I want to say thank you to everybody who has put their thoughts and prayers out as I have been sick, fighting against the coof. Still feeling a lot better today. I was feeling a lot better yesterday. I was able to do a live stream, and I know that a lot of people were interested in this bit of news, but I was waiting for the actual numbers to come in before doing any dedicated segment to it. And so we'll go ahead and dive into the story here, starting off with our friend Tony. Hey, Tony. Over on Deadline, he just loves to shill for pretty much anything that comes from a major box office studio from just any corner of the world. But as it mentions here, it drops 68%, Thor Love and Thunder does, whereas Crawdads Sings to $17 million tune. Don't you always love those very fun titles? It says there, the wearing down of the MCU luster is unfortunately being seen. Remember back in the day when it was Star Wars fatigue, and that's what they used to try to explain why Solo, a Star Wars story, wasn't doing very well, and even though before Solo had come out, they actually said it was going to break records because of the pre-sales we're trying to show, and it was breaking pre-sale records. Remember all that? Because you know what? I remember. It's always amazing to me how they put it being, the MCU luster. Could it not just be the fact that these films, that this specific film actually is just not very good, that we can look even back to a film that did well at the box office in Doctor Strange 2 in the Multiverse of Madness and say it just wasn't a very good film? And that there likely will not be other good films set to come forward because the MCU and Disney have decided to push identity politics above everything else? Could it be that? It probably is, but you won't hear that from the likes of people like Tony at Deadline. He says right here that Thor Love and Thunder is having a great fall with a 68% drop in its second weekend to $46 million. That's the domestic number there. This sequel isn't even, this is an interesting bit of factoid interest, factoid fact. Yes, factoid information. Even the theatrical day and date of Black Widow, like last year, was on Disney+. So trying to point out here that it had a similar drop-off to Black Widow. However, Black Widow's excuse, remember when they used this excuse to explain why the film wasn't doing well, was because, oh, well, it's day and date on Disney+. It's also on Disney+, guys. And so, hey, that explains why it's not this big hit. Okay, well, we're looking at this film right here, not on Disney+, and it's also having a similar drop-off, and we're also seeing it maybe barely going to be able to pass its own break-even point and maybe make a small amount of profit to boot. So what's your excuse now? That's right, you don't quite understand it yet because you've been in the dark for so long and you refuse to step into the light. It's like the allegory of the caveman. You need to break those chains and actually step out into the light. You might be blinded for a little bit, but it's time to wake up and smell the coffee. Well, a Taika Waititi movie improved beyond its high $130 million opening estimates last weekend into the $144 million range. Pause again for a second here. Please stop trying to rewrite your own history. This film was projected to make a lot more. I remember when this film was projected to make upwards of $150 million or so, and then all of a sudden it started dropping off, especially once Lightyear came out and Lightyear became a huge box office bomb. People said, oh, you know what, Disney may not be in as strong of a position as we once saw. I mean, if a Disney Pixar film can bomb, well then I guess an MCU film may not be necessarily a guaranteed success either. And yeah, turns out that you readjusted your numbers and now you're trying to act as if, oh, things are actually pretty good. And then you go on to prop up terrible garbage tier organizations like CinemaScore by trying to say that a sour audience rating is a B+. Yeah, I'll let that speak for itself. Thor's second weekend drop ranks among the MCU's worst of all time, including Doctor Strange with a 67% drop. Again, that also had another $150 million that Thor Love and Thunder did not have. A 68% drop for Black Widow, but remember, day-and-date release model. And then it even mentions Spider-Man, but we all remember that Spider-Man had one of the biggest openings of all time, and that film was doing numbers so crazy because people were still stuck in the, oh, but what about the COVID? What about the COVID? Well, now having had it myself, I can say to the people who are doing all the fear-mongering, screw you. And all I can say is that talk to your own doctors and ask them about things like the McCullough Protocol, etc. That's all I can say. I'm not a doctor. Take advice from your own doctor. That's largely due to Christmas falling on a Saturday, though, and everyone knows the Sony MCU title was making money hand over fist on a daily basis. It's an outlier. Yes, an outlier that y'all did not see coming and that y'all didn't quite understand how people could possibly have braved going out, other than the fact that it was actually a really fun, entertaining movie, and that's what people actually want to go see. Anyway, goes on to say, worldwide, Disney has a different brag on Thor Love and Thunder, and that's that the superhero is about to cross $500 million worldwide. Not really as impressive when you look at its actual break-even point. Domestic stands at 233, global at 498, and then goes on to talk about the Top Gun Maverick doing incredibly well. But my favorite part of all this, and I mentioned this on my live stream last night, is the fact that he mentions, anecdotally, Thor 4 is quite a fun ride. If you see it in Screen X, it's mind-blowing. Well, apparently a lot of people don't agree with you, bud. He then goes on to say it's a fast movie. So is that trying to be an excuse? But not as Byzantine as Doctor Strange 2 in Eternals. Now, I'm sure you don't mean it as a dig when you say Byzantine, but the fact that you're trying to make excuses for films that you've clearly shilled for in the past, it just really isn't all working out for you, especially when you follow it with this line of, clearly something isn't resonating with fans. You don't want to take any guesses, Tony? You don't want to take any guesses? I bet you wouldn't. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive into the actual numbers themselves for the weekend domestically. So as you can see, Thor Love and Thunder dropping 68%, a massive drop-off there. I suspect to see bigger drop-offs in the future, even amidst not having a lot of competition, because you still have Minions Rise of Gru doing well, because you still have Top Gun Maverick hanging around, even after 8 weeks of release. I don't think that necessarily means that people are going to automatically go see a movie, even if they've heard that it's bad, right? Just because there's no competition for a movie does not mean people automatically say, well, there's no competition, so I guess I'll go see the film that no one's really been saying I should go see. That's really not how all it works. Anyway, Thor Love and Thunder, though, dropping 68%. Minions, The Rise of Gru, now out for 3 weeks, having a 44% drop, so another strong hold for that movie. That movie doing insanely well, making hundreds of millions in net profit at this point, so kudos to Universal for that, though I'm going to call them out for continuing to do work with the CCP, as I've been calling them out since the very beginning, because films like, for instance, Jurassic World Dominion, which just crossed $900 million worldwide, has given hundreds of millions of dollars to the CCP, which allows for their human rights violations to continue. We go on with Where the Crawdads Sing, a brand new release coming into the top 3. I think that's definitely higher than what many people expected it to. $17 million for that film, coming out at over 3,650 screens. Have not seen the film because, of course, I got sick right when the film came out, so I might go see the film. I've heard relatively good things about it. It is an adaptation from a book. I've heard people not like the book, but hey, maybe the movie ends up being better than the book. Sometimes that does happen, though rarely. Top Gun Maverick still in the top 5. It did finally drop out of the top 3, this time into the top 4 spot. Paramount getting another $12 million for Top Gun Maverick, a 23% hold after 8 weeks of release. The fact that after 8 weeks this film is still in over 3,200 screens is over $617 million domestically, over $600+ million internationally. Hey, kudos to Top Gun Maverick for continuing to do insanely well, and I would suspect that it's going to hang around in this top 5 probably for at least another week or two, especially with not a whole lot of stuff coming out in the future, in the near future, that is. Elvis is also still hanging around from Warner Brothers in the top 5, making another $7.6 million, a 32% drop from the previous week. They're still pushing this film out in a lot of theaters. It's still available in a lot of places, and it's still doing well enough for them to be able to start to make some ground back every single week. However, it is still not at the break-even point, as it had a very large budget compared to the kind of film and story that it was telling. So we'll have to wait and see exactly whether or not it's able to actually make that money back. But it's definitely one of the better performing Warner Brothers films, which isn't saying much since Warner Brothers has put out a lot of box office duds over the last couple of years. We then go on to another new release in Paws of Fury, The Legend of Hank, which is not looking very good for Paramount. Hey, you win some, you lose some, Paramount. This opened up to $6.2 million. No one's going to see it. All the kids are going to see Minions instead. You then have the very successful rated R film, The Black Phone, which everyone's telling me to go see, maybe when I start feeling better. This made another $5.3 million, a 32% hold from the previous week after 4 weeks of release. Because this film has also crossed $100 million worldwide for a rated R film like this, hey, kudos to them. It was a lower budget film as well, so it is doing quite well. Jurassic World Dominion still hanging around after 6 weeks of release, a 42% hold, making another $4.9 million, as I mentioned, just crossing now $900 million worldwide. But as you can see, it's not making a whole lot of money here domestically. When you compare this to a Top Gun Maverick, for instance, you're noticing, not really hinging or really not hitting as well with American audiences, which isn't all that surprising because the film is just trash. It's just a giant trash heap. So can't say I'm that surprised. However, even though I hated this movie, I did suspect the film was still in a good position to do well. It's not looking like $1 billion is going to be in its future as I thought it could have been in the beginning. But the fact that it's at $900+ million at this point, I think goes to show you as to why, had this film actually even been a halfway decent movie, it probably would have gotten to the $1 billion mark. We also have another new release in Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, a small indie film in over 980 screens, making $1.9 million, so kind of impressive there, at least compared to its per theater ratio. And then rounding out the top 10, still in the top 10, but not for much longer, is Lightyear from Disney. Yeah, that's right. Now pulled out of another 740 screens, only in 1,300 screens at this point. 5 weeks of release, this film is dead in the water. Do not be surprised if you hear that they're going to announce the film's going to be early release, surprise release on Disney Plus, because hey, they got to keep their cash cow going some way or another. Speaking of cash cows that are really not looking good for the future, at least as far as the future projects are concerned. Let's talk about the MCU's cash cow, right? Disney has relied on the MCU for a very long time, even going back to Doctor Strange 2, though that film was not very good, it still made over $950 million worldwide. Thor Love and Thunder, though, is starting to show that there is not necessarily fatigue going on, but that the audiences are not just going to be saying, yeah, it's an MCU film, and so therefore I'm going to automatically, 1, go to it, or 2, automatically love it because it happens to be an MCU movie. So I think because of those two factors going on, we're going to start to see that law of diminishing returns happen for a lot of the future MCU projects going forward. Unless, of course, they can actually project and put forward a good or competently made movie. Up until that point, if they continue to put out trash and drivel like this, suspect that you will have continued bad word of mouth, and bad word of mouth will continue to bring these films into making a lot less than previous films in the franchise. In fact, if we can compare this Thor Love and Thunder barely getting to around $500 million after a couple weeks of release, if we compare this to other films that are notable, other films that are similar as far as the general scope is concerned, I think Doctor Strange: Multiverse of Madness, since that came out also this year, and also the previous Thor film, are films that are worthy of comparison too. At the same point in its release, we adjust these numbers for inflation, of course. We saw that, of course, Doctor Strange 2 was at $292 million by the same point of its release, and so this film is still tracking enough behind to where, again, $700 million is likely going to be where this film caps out, or at least that $700 million to $800 million range, which would put it below where Thor Ragnarok was by the end of its run, and I think that is a very, very bad sign going forward. As you can see, Ragnarok was at 216.7, but that's not all that far behind, and we all know that Ragnarok had very good positive word of mouth, had strong legs, continuing to do well past it. In fact, it even ended up beating out Doctor Strange 2 on several of these days, and also down the line as well, especially as, again, those legs continue to do well. Even towards the end of its run, as you can see, was making a lot more than what you had from Doctor Strange 2. I suspect you'll have very similar numbers and comparisons to be made between Ragnarok and Thor Love and Thunder. And just as a reminder, Ragnarok made $869.4. There's no chance in hell that this movie, Thor Love and Thunder, gets anywhere close to that. Minions: Rise of Gru is doing incredibly well, $532.7 million worldwide, where the Crawdads sing $17 million domestically. Guess that's okay for a film like it. Didn't cost all that much, and so doesn't need to make a whole lot to make its money back. Top Gun Maverick, as the numbers is behind for at least this week, is making Top Gun Maverick has reached the $1.2 billion mark. Elvis, $185.6 million. Paws of Fury at $6.25 million. Black Phone, $114.5 million worldwide. Jurassic World Dominion, $902.4, and Lightyear, of course, $212.9. Not looking good at all. We'll go ahead and look at some box office charting, though, because we all love charts here. here, right? Charting is always a fun time. So let's go ahead and talk about Thor: Love and Thunder, since we can make some projections. Based on the first 2 weeks of release, I'm projecting the film to make somewhere between $711 and $995 million. Now, keep in mind that $995, right, that 50% number, meaning that it could double the amount of money, that would be if it had good word of mouth. It's not having good word of mouth, which means that little projection, that smaller projection of 711.2 is a lot more likely of a scenario. And also, because we've seen these drop-offs sometimes be worse than the projections, especially if this film ends up mapping up very similarly to what we saw with Doctor Strange 2, which right now it is pacing very similarly to what we saw with Doctor Strange 2. We could even see this film end up in that 75% range, which means it could drop into the 600s, and that could be a very precarious situation because it has to make 625 just to break even. In fact, when we look at those numbers, as I mentioned, the break-even point for Love and Thunder is 625 million, and so right now the projections are that it'll make somewhere between 50 million and 222 million. It's not going to get anywhere close to this, and so this is a much more likely scenario. And so even if in the best case scenario it gets to $50 million in net profit, that is a very, 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 very poor sign, to say the very least. At this point, it's at 76 million in the red, which is why I still do think there's a chance for it to hit its break-even point. But the fact still remains is that if we see similar drop-offs to what we saw with Doctor Strange 2, 72%. All right. So again, my range usually has films making between 50 and 70% of their entire box office in the first 2 weeks. But sometimes there's films that do a lot better. For instance, you look to a Top Gun Maverick doing a lot better than that, more than doubling its money. But then you also have films like, for instance, what I just had highlighted in Doctor Strange 2, which ended up doing worse than that, ended up making less than that in its first 2 weeks of release. And so if we see a similar percentage to this, if we see a similar number here as we've seen right now, or seeing right now with Thor: Love and Thunder, we could potentially see then the number end somewhere in that $600 million range. And if it's just barely over that 625, which again, I think that likely it'll get closer to the $700 million range, I do think it's going to make its money back. I do think it's going to make a small amount of profit. The fact still remains, though, is that that amount of profit compared to how much money they put into the film is not going to be a good look for it, right? It's one thing to say Doctor Strange 2 had terrible word of mouth, still made over $950 million worldwide, still made hundreds of millions in net profit. Again, $272 million in net profit. That is still an incredibly impressive number there. Not anywhere near Top Gun Maverick's number or even near Jurassic World Dominion's number. Still, all that being said, it is worth noting nonetheless where that number currently stands. And anyway, these are the numbers as they stand. You can check out some of the other movies as well and where they currently stand. But what are y'all's thoughts about it? Do you think that Thor: Love and Thunder is going to be able to get to that max or minimum range? I would be surprised if anyone says it's going to get close to $1 billion. There's just no way that that's even possible with the word of mouth campaign going on against it. Let me know your thoughts about that. And also, where do you think the final number is going to end up? Again, for me, I think it's going to be somewhere between $700 and $750 million if I had to put money on it. But we'll have to wait and see exactly how closely it matches up against Doctor Strange 2. And if we see it end up doing worse than Doctor Strange 2, or again, lots of things can happen between now and the end of its theatrical run. So let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, not that fire button on Odyssey. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to my July Patreon subscribe star and locals members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. First starting off with Brandon, let's go Brandon, Chris from the 80s, who you can check out over on YouTube, Garrett Searles, Hymir Ari Hymason, Jeff Toon, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Laura, The Modern Major General Story, Father, Luca Illick, Orange Hat Reviews, who you can also check out over on his YouTube channel as well. Congrats on recently getting to 1,000 subscribers. Rosetta Allen, who you can also find on YouTube as well. Stan Andrian and Miss Martin Muses, who also has her own YouTube channel. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on the platform of Patreon. We also have my Subscribe Star members, Matt317, Storm Tracker, The R, Fast Reaction, John B, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alice McCarthy Jr., shout out to you, good sir, and continue that awesome recovery that you are doing. Dean Heiss, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. ZK-Man, you can find out over and follow him on Twitter as well. And we also have my locals members. We have of course, the lovely and amazing Minnesota hockey fan. How about a hockey player? UAB UAB Mad Dog, Mike Jackson for the win, and Robert Barnes, as well as Brett D90. Thank you very much. And my last supporter, of course, is the amazing Tina B, Empress of the Universe, one of my mods on the channel. Check out her new show with my other Valkyrie, Stephanie B, on her channel, Tina B's channel, which is called Soup to Nuts. Go check that out because it is pretty awesome and fun content. Anyway, that is going to be it for all of my Keeper of the Bifrost level members and above. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every video and live stream, please make sure that you check out the top link of the video description. It is w.lo, the Willow link, as I like to call it, and you can find my Patreon, Subscribe Star, etc., where you can get not only shoutouts, but also access to an exclusive podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger every single month, and also access to giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, etc., all that good stuff. Check that out in the video description. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.